problem with it is that it set up terrible incentives to deliver the power in the cheapest possible way. One useful way to start here is with a little history of of electrical power in Texas, which I mean, an important contribution was made by the New Deal, which for which basically electrification of the country was a very important priority. And so you had the Tennessee Valley Authority of rural electrification. And here in Texas, we had the Lower Colorado River Authority, which Lyndon Johnson, as a young congressman, promoted with Franklin Roosevelt, got authority for electrifying the Texas Hill Country. This was all public power. The city of Austin had public power from 1895 and still has a public electric power facility. And all of this worked reasonably well and certainly fostered the economic development of the state. The New Deal was extremely important in Texas. But as time went on, that philosophy faded, and we developed well, first of all, a very conservative political establishment that was very much in the hands of the energy industry and abetted by an economics profession that was promoting a kind of cult of the efficiency of free markets. And it turns out that there was one particular economist, an energy consultant, who helped design a system for Texas that was adopted under Governor Rick Perry in 2002. It had been in the works for some time before that. And this was an idea that we would have a basically free market in electrical generation. And all the state would do would be to maintain the distribution grid and assure, if you like, the coordinate the provision of power to the system. But power itself would be generated by a bunch of independent companies, and that consumers could contract with individual companies on all kinds of different terms. Some consumers would take long-term contracts, and others would take very short-term contracts. Just in one case, just get the wholesale price. And the price was supposed to adjust. Now, wholesale price was supposed to adjust. So a balanced supply and demand. This was kind of the economist fiction. And notion about how things would work. A number of cities, including Austin, didn't opt in. We kept our state, our municipal power, but they were nevertheless tied into the grid in Texas. Texas could do this because its electrical grid was never connected in any serious way with the rest of the country. And so it was exempt from federal electricity regulation. So they set up a system to do this, and to be fair and reasonable about it, most of the time in ordinary weather, electricity gets delivered in Texas, and people, it's part of the backdrop of daily life. Problem with it is that it set up terrible incentives to deliver the power in the cheapest possible way. The entire rest of the country does it very adequately, and the power does not go out in sub-zero temperatures in Chicago or in the Green Mountains of Vermont or any place that one can name. These where it really matters to have electricity in the cold. You have it, and so this is not complicated from an engineering standpoint particularly, but it does cost money. And if you're not have a regulation that's requiring it, and it's only going to matter, some tiny fraction of the time, the providers will get away without doing this. And the entire Texas electrical system, energy system, was vulnerable to extreme cold. And the problem with that, when you get cold, the demand for electricity goes up, and that demand is what economists call very inelastic. That's to say, people need electricity, they don't turn off the power when the temperature goes down below 10 degrees Fahrenheit, because it's a life or death matter at that point, and also a matter of the stability of their plumbing and their, as we've discovered, as we've not discovered, but the lesson has certainly been driven in the last few days. And so the system was built to be effectively radically unstable in extreme conditions. And that was, we already had a bit of a run-in with that in 2011. The people who designed the system knew on their reports saying, okay, we need to do something about getting more investment into the resilience of the system. Didn't happen because, of course, it cost money and there was no regulatory imperative that it happened. So it was, in fact, set up to fail. And what happened over the last week was entirely predictable. You get an extreme cold snap, demand for electricity goes up, the wholesale price goes through the roof, and the power system at the same time starts to fail. And when it starts to fail, then we get some other realities. One was that the local utilities, which had to allocate power, had to choose. I mean, they could no longer do this on the basis of price, obviously. In many of cases, the prices aren't passed through the retail customer anyway on a short-term basis. So the retail customer is just doing what they do anyway, trying to, maybe they turn down the thermostats, but they're still burning a lot of power. But the local entities have priorities. They can't shut off the hospitals. They can't shut off the fire stations or the police or and for that matter, tall buildings. They are difficult to shut off because you shut off the elevators and people are stuck when they can't get out from the 20th floors up. So basically, you have to maintain power in some places. And that meant in the city of Austin in particular, and other places as well, that you cut power in other parts of the city, and that power didn't come on at all. You couldn't rotate. In other words, you could make this, if you could do 3 hours on, 3 hours off, or 6 hours on, 6 hours off, people are going to get through it. Their pipes won't freeze and their houses won't be wrecked. But if you, in this kind of thing, you have 2 or 3 days, which people are without power, it then disrupts this other kind of ecology, which is the water system. And that's what happened. As people's pipes froze and they broke and their houses got and suffered thousands of dollars of damage in each case, and millions and billions of dollars of damage across the state. So the whole thing was just a massive revelation of the failure of the design of the original system. So that was one thing that happened. The other thing that happened was that they cut off power. When they started shedding load and cutting off power, they cut off power to the energy producers. The energy producers were supplying natural gas to the power stations. So you've got a kind of what's described as a death spiral of energy generation. And so that the power supplies go down even further as the demand is extraordinarily high. And that's the way the market system breaks down. The market system. The reason you need a regulated system is precisely to encourage and to require that the generating companies protect against contingencies that they don't really think is in their economic interest to protect against, but it's very much in the interest of the public. That this kind of thing, that when the system is really under stress, that it doesn't break, and that's where we are. So it's a very serious problem that faces the whole state. So how you go about now really reconstructing the electrical system so as to make it conform to some acceptable standards and some acceptable notions of the public interest.
You mentioned 2011, there just wasn't a regulatory imperative, there wasn't money. What's different? Is there any difference between now and 2011? Do you foresee potential changes that we need?
Well, yeah, in 2011, the mythology of the market system was still very strong, and the episode was relatively short. This calamity, I think, lays bare for everybody that the underlying system is a failure, and so there's a real chance here that people who have common sense and pragmatic outlook will say we need to do something different and start doing that. The difficulty, of course, is that Texas, all the state officials are in the pockets of the energy sector. They take campaign money from them and to the tune of millions of dollars. They were out during the crisis. The governor was out making a ridiculous argument, blaming the renewable sector, which was a small part of the problem. And renewables, of course, also need to be weatherized and weren't. But windmills in other parts of the world work right through the winter. They have them in Greenland that work through the winter. So it's not an impossible problem. And you have people like Rick Perry saying that Texans are prepared to sacrifice themselves in order to avoid the curse of socialism. Well, yeah, I think we've got a lot of Texans might have been converted to a little bit of socialism. And remembering too that this was the way things worked under the New Deal and public power before this free market cult took control of the energy sector in Texas. So it's part of our own history. We don't have to reach out to some other place to learn how to do this right. There's basically a trade-off. You can run things on the cheap, but then they're very fragile. You make them fragile, they tend to break. If you lay on an extra layer of protection, yes, it costs more. But at the end of the day, in extreme conditions, the system continues to function. And since lives depend, if this were the supply of lettuce, something like that, well, we'd say, okay, we can make some compromises here because people don't need lettuce all the time. But you do need electricity all the time. And so you want to have it in the hands of people who are going to say, okay, we will put in enough resilience into the system to make it work under basically all foreseeable conditions in Texas, not just 99% of them.
Professor Eaton mentioned that the cost of resiliency is always less than the cost of chaos.
In the long run, of course, and of course, who bears the cost? Right now, I've seen estimates that there are $20 billion of costs of repairs, which are going to fall on Texas households. And I would suggest that the bill be sent to the politicians who designed the system and to the consultants who designed the system, to ERCOT that manage the system, that there really is a public responsibility to step up here and help people rebuild their houses and their lives, because this is outrageous. This is it is not something which people signed up for. There's no system that you don't need to regulate. People my age need to take their blood pressure medicine. Don't try to drive your car without oil or water in the radiator. Those are regulatory things. Don't run a nuclear reactor without a cooling system, or any kind of machine without a cooling system. Everything functions that needs regulation of some kind or another. Otherwise the energy in the system bursts through the materials and you have a breakdown. And that's pretty much exactly what happened to the whole electricity grid in Texas, just in affecting 23 million people. That's really just a great example of this principle. Markets do not regulate themselves. Real division of interest is between consumers and people of Texas, all of whom were affected by the cold. And the power generators who were doing very nicely under this system, and that will probably drag their heels about fixing things unless there's a real change in the way the authorities approach the problem.